All right, let's talk about administrative discretion. So, we're going to talk about the important power that members of our bureaucracy have on their own. So, here you see a man going through the TSA at an airport. He's having his luggage searched there. So, we've got a couple TSA agents here. We're going to talk about them because they have a lot of power in determining how the law actually gets enforced. So, we'll talk about some different agencies and their ability to decide how to enforce the law. First, let's start with the president. So all this takes place in the executive branch, right? The president and the executive branch, it's their job to carry out the policy, to enforce law. So the power that the president has is the president may issue decisions about how they want laws to be enforced. So, for example, we've talked about this a few times. Under President Obama, he told the Drug Enforcement Agency, I want you to prioritize drugs like heroin over drugs like marijuana. Under President Trump, he came along and told the Drug Enforcement Agency, I want you to resume prioritizing marijuana laws. So the president can tell the agency how they want things done. But the problem here is that the president and even the high up people in the executive branch, they can't actually control every single action of every street level bureaucrat. Remember, those street level bureaucrats, those are people that are delivering the service to you. You will interact with a street level bureaucrat. So let's look at what kind of power they have. All right, let's talk about those street level bureaucrats. We see some here. We see some EPA workers. We see a TSA agent, a DEA agent. To have administrative discretion, we're talking about how those people on the civil servant level can handle enforcement of the law here. So when administrative discretion takes place, what's happened is an administrator makes a choice about how that law is going to be enforced. So that may come from the top. The head of the department may say, I want you to enforce this policy in this way, but it can also come from street level bureaucrats making that decision on their own. So in a way, this is a check by the bureaucracy on the president, right? The president can say, I want you to do this. And if the workers themselves actually just refuse to do it, it's going to be hard to stop everyone from having some kind of policy impact that way. So the president may order enforcement to take place in a certain way, but the civil servant, that street level bureaucrat, may choose to enforce that policy differently. All right, first, let's look at regulatory agencies. So how can this happen in a regulatory agency? The president wants things done a certain way, but the Federal Trade Commission, agents might decide to ignore a case of false advertisement. That's the kind of rule that they're supposed to do. They're supposed to prohibit false advertising, but they may decide to ignore a case or decide that a case doesn't fit. The FCC might decide not to fine a TV station for language that would be banned but came across on a live broadcast. This kind of stuff happens all the time. Like, you're broadcasting live, and maybe somebody that's not working for the news, but somebody in the background decides they're going to scream a cuss word. Well, the FCC can decide they didn't mean to break this rule, so we're not going to fine them this way. The EPA may decide not to fine a company for a particular problem if they're trying to fix it or something like that. So these decisions all get made by the street level bureaucrats, and they impact how the law was enforced. All right, in the cabinet departments, the same thing. These street level bureaucrats can impact how the policy gets enforced. So they may make choices about not carrying out the policy as directed. So in the Department of Education, let's say, Common Core says that math ought to be taught a certain way. But what if your math teacher ignores the Common Core directions and decides to teach you a different way? That is, that has an impact on the effectiveness of the policy. And the Department of Education can't actually be in every classroom across the country every day, making sure that their rules are followed. In the Department of Homeland Security, that includes the TSA. So the agent going through your luggage before you get on a plane, that agent might see a bottle of water in your backpack and let you get on the plane with it anyway, because they don't think that the water bottle is an actual threat. So that has an impact on the enforcement of policy. Even government corporations have this power. There are rules that they're supposed to follow, and they might not always follow these the same way. So just a couple quick examples here. The U.S. Postal Service, for safety reasons, not allowed to accept a package that weighs more than 1 pound. You have to actually bring that into a post office. You can't just leave it in your mailbox to ship. But if your mailman is, coming by delivering your mail, and they see your package, like if it weighs like a couple ounces over, that mail person might just decide, whatever, I'm going to take this package anyway. And that impacts the implementation of the policy. The person driving the Amtrak train, right, the conductor of the Amtrak train, they may decide that they're like behind or something like that. To get back on track, they may decide to break the speed limit for the train or things like that. These aren't huge things. These aren't like changing much about the policy, but they do have impacts. This is how our people at the street level actually providing the service can impact how the policy is carried out. All right, we want to talk about another topic real quick today that we're going to call government by proxy. So we're going to talk about how within the bureaucracy, not everything is necessarily done by a government agency. This is a pretty new thing here where the governments have started to pay private companies to carry out the policy on their behalf. So when we talk about government by proxy, we're talking about the bureaucracy paying a private business. We call this contracting out. They might contract out a service that should be a job of the government. They might do this, for all sorts of reasons, like lowering costs or things like that, and we'll talk about those in a second. But this happens a lot. We talked about how we have 3 million people working for the United States government. In this country. We really have 13 million people working for the government in some way. So they work for a private business, and that private business is doing a job that the government is paying them to do. So we call these people government contractors. They work for a business, and that business works for the government. All right, so there are lots of advantages to this policy. This is why it happens here. First of all, the private businesses have a lot more flexibility. There are lots of rules that the government has to follow that private companies don't have to follow in the same way. So this might allow a job to be done more efficiently or in a different way or at a lower cost because they don't have to follow all of the rules of the United States government. This also might happen because the government wants to take advantage of the fact that there's skills in the private sector. Not everyone who's great at something works for the government, so they might want to take advantage of a company that can do something better than the government can do. So they might pay a company who's a particular expert in something to do a role, provide a service for the national government. This is also a way where the government can save money because workers for the federal government, workers at all levels of the bureaucracy are very well paid. And a private company might offer to do this service for less money. They're going to pay their workers less money, and that's a way that the U.S. government can get away with without having to pay their workers the full rate. They can hire a company that will pay workers who will work more cheaply to provide that service. You guys see this all the time. So even at like school, Shelby County Schools used to pay their own maintenance staff and stuff to take care of the building. And those people were really well paid. They usually kept their jobs for a long time. And they contracted out this job to a company in town called Service Master. And in Service Master, they pay their employees about a little more than a minimum wage. They don't have to follow the same rules that Shelby County Schools does. And so the government is able to get a service provided much more cheaply than it would be if all those people worked for the government. Now, normally, government by proxy, people don't pay attention to it. It's not that big of a deal. It's just the government doing something maybe more efficiently, maybe saving money. But there are a couple of areas where this has become controversial recently. One of those would be the military. Obviously, the military is a function of the government. But recently, in the last in the last few decades of military operations, the military has contracted out work to construction companies because like the Army has the ability to build those kinds of things. But if you've got a construction company that's better, they have the expertise to like build bridges or pipelines or things like that, the government could take advantage of that expertise. In the 2003 war in Iraq, nearly half of the troops there were private employees of private companies, and they were not soldiers of the United States military. Now, this caused some trouble. Most notably, there was a big scandal with a company called Blackwater USA. They've changed their name now, but they provided private armies to the United States military, and they didn't really follow the same rules that the U.S. military follows when it's conducting operations in another country. They killed a lot of civilians, and a lot of people got in trouble for this. And so that's one of the places where government by proxy can go wrong. And this is one of the places where people are a little concerned when the government contracts out work to a private company. Another big area where this takes place, and there's a lot of controversy about this, and a lot of people don't support this, is the government has been contracting out different areas of law enforcement, especially prisons. So the federal government and many states, running a prison is a job of the government, but the federal government and a lot of states have used private companies to run these prisons. The biggest one of these, the most known, is called the Corrections Corporation of America, CCA. And so the CCA is just a company, and they tell governments, hey, we can run a prison more cheaply than you can. We can run a prison more efficiently or effectively. What happens here is the states might use a company like this to provide prison services. Again, same things go into place. They don't really follow all of the same rules that the U.S. Government would do when it is building its own prison and running its own prison and things like that. So there's a lot of controversy there. Also, you've probably encountered this in your life. Those of you guys that are driving, police officers, it's part of their job is to enforce like traffic policy and stuff like that. And many states, including here in Tennessee and Memphis for sure, states have contracted out actions like enforcing running red lights and stuff like that. So like if there's a red light camera, that's run by a private company, and they mail the tickets out to you for running the red light. And that's a job that could be done by a police officer, but this company promises, hey, we can do this a lot cheaper. We're going to put a camera up at this light. We're going to mail tickets to people and stuff like that. And so this is an area that's also not very popular with people when the state has contracted out police services to private companies this way. All right, so the big thing here was we want to make sure you guys understand administrative discretion. Let's think about when the street level bureaucrat is making a decision about how the law is going to be enforced. Also, we'll talk a little bit about, make sure you remember a little bit about government contracting out part of its work to private companies and stuff. But the big thing here to pay attention to is the administrative discretion. Now we want to take a minute and we want to look at we've talked about how these agencies have impact over policy and all this, and part of it is their independence and stuff. We want to look at how the legislative and executive branch are able to control how the bureaucracies behave.